السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with Surah Al-Mujadila, and which is Surah number 58, and we'll go through inshallah ta'ala verses number 3 and 4. Verses number 3 and 4. So Surah number 58 and verses 3 and 4. We'll start inshallah ta'ala with the recitation of the ayat. I'll recite inshallah ta'ala and repeat after me. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. والذين يظاهرون من نسائهم ثم يعودون لما قالوا فتحرير رقبة من قبل أن يتماسا ذلكم توعظون به والله بما تعملون خبير. فمن لم يجد فصيام شهرين متتابعين من قبل أن يتماسا فمن لم يستطع فإطعام 60 مسكينا ذلك لتؤمنوا بالله ورسوله وتلك حدود الله وللكافرين عذاب أليم. Okay, the first ayah. والذين يظاهرون من نسائهم. والذين, just to remind that with the dhal you have to have your tongue outside. والذين يظاهرون من noon and noon becomes one with 2 counts. من نساء 4 to 5 counts مد here. من نسائهم ثم ميم متشدة takes 2 counts. يعودون لما قالوا فتحرير رقبة تنوين after ميم إدغام with غنة with tone. من قبل, this is إخفاء, نون after قاف, and then باء with سكون mix قلقلة. من قبل أي 2 counts. أي يتماسى, this mad is longer than anything else. 6 counts. Why? Because you have one of the letters of vowels, which is alif, waw, and ya. After it, a letter with shadda, like waladhalin. Waladhalin is 6 counts, longer than any other med. The same thing with yatamassa. ذلكم توعظون به والله بما تعملون خبير. The next ayah, فمن لم يجد. فمن لم, the noon is not to be said, and the lam without a غنة. فمن لم, don't say فمل, this is wrong. فمن لم يجد, and the dal with قلقلة. فصيام شهرين متتابعين من قبل, again إخفاء, and then the باء with قلقلة. من قبل أن يتماسى 6 counts again. فمن لم يستطع and the تاء and طاء, one is light and one is heavy. فإطعام, the طاء with قلقلة. فإطعام 60 مسكينة, and if you connect مسكينة ذلك إخفاء. ذلك لتؤمنوا بالله ورسوله وتلك حدود الله وللكافرين عذاب أليم. The meaning of the ayat, the translation, and those who pronounce ظهار, والذين يظاهرون, those who make ظهار from their wives and then wish to go back on what they said, then there must be the freeing of a slave before they touch one another. That is what you are admonished thereby, and Allah is aware of what you do. And he who does not find a slave, then a fast for 2 months consecutively before they touch one another. And he who is unable, then the feeding of 60 poor persons. That is for you to believe completely in Allah and His Messenger, and those are the limits set by Allah, and for the disbelievers is a painful punishment. So continuing with the rulings of al-dhihar that we talked about before. So those who make dhihar, and al-dhihar, as we said, from dhahr, those who forbid their wives on themselves by a statement, by just simply saying, a man would say to his wife that she's forbidden on him. Whether he says to her that you are to me like my mother or like the back of my mother, or to say that she's forbidden on him, that's it. Then the rulings apply, which shows the importance of watching what a person says, and how that the relationship between husbands and wife, it's initiated by a word of mouth. When how the marriage is done, when the guardian of the wife would say to the man that it intended to marry, is zawajtuka ibnati, for example, I make you marry my daughter, and you say I accepted the marriage of your daughter, and there are witnesses witnessing that, then they are married. It doesn't have to be documented for the marriage to be marriage, and for the rulings of marriage to be applied. So therefore, if a person, and the same thing with divorce, even if a person is joking and says to his wife that she's divorced, she is divorced, which shows that the responsibility that a person has when it comes to words of mouth. Once a person says something, it departs from the person. It's like you throwing a stone at someone. You cannot take it back if you cause wound to that person. So words are actions in the deen of Islam. Words are not just speech and that's it. Speech and actions, they have the same category of responsibility. And that's why the early generations of Islam, when they considered that what they say is actions, they would think before they speak. Before you go to a place to do something, right? You would think about it. You make istikhara. If it's something that is permissible, you would make sure that what you're doing is right and correct before you would do it. The same thing before we speak, because there's no difference between speech and actions in the deen of Islam. And this is an example of that. A person just simply saying at a moment of anger, he would forbid his wife on him. And sometimes people, they would say it, and shaitan makes it easy for them to say that when they're fighting, not just with their wives. A person at work, for example, and someone gets him angry, he would forbid his wife on himself. Or he would swear in such a way that his wife is forbidden on him if this is true or this is not true or whatever. So this is a very dangerous situation, and that's why the kafara is a very heavy one. So the ayah says, وَالَّذِينَ يُظَاهِرُونَ مِن نِسَائِهِمْ ثُمَّ يَعُودُونَ لِمَا قَالُوا. That means they made the dhahar, they said something, and then they want to return back of what they want to take back what they said. ثُمَّ يَعُودُونَ, return back. لِمَا قَالُوا, because of what they said. So the meaning of that is that they want to go back to their wives, because once he said that, he forbidded his wife on himself. So he wants to go back to his wife. He wants to have relations with his wife. He wants to touch his wife, and so on. Just once he determined to do that, right, then he has to do the expiation or the kafara. So the kafara is to be done before he touches his wife. Not that their life go on as normal, and then he has to make this kafara and he delays it. Maybe next year he would do it or whatever. It's easy for him. No, it is not permissible. She is forbidden on him. Haram for him. Like a stranger woman. It's haram for him to even touch her till he expiates, and he makes these expiations as the ayah says. And this becomes an obligation once he determined to go back. because he might not go back to his wife again. That means they're divorced forever, and then the matter is finished with the marriage. But if they want to go back, once he determined, then he has to do the expiation. ثم يعودون لما قالوا, and يعودون, returning back here to consummating the marriage or to have relations again. So what is the kafara? تحرير رقبة. Right? والذين يظاهرون من نسائهم ثم يعودون لما قالوا فتحرير رقبة من قبل أن يتماسا. That's why the word يتماسا before they touch one another. And the med is so long like this. Right? So فتحرير رقبة, that means they have to free a slave. And we heard the hadith yesterday about the wife of Aus ibn Samit, and the Prophet ﷺ told her to say to her husband that he has to free a slave. So freeing a slave, a believing slave, right? And this is mentioned in another verse, right? That it will come, whether it's male or female, if there are slavery, to free a slave, to purchase, if a person has the means to purchase a slave and to free them, right? And that slave has to, with conditions, is not someone that is sick, for example, or a slave that is fit in whatever position that they're in, they're working, whatever. So is to free them. And you see how many things of expiations of sins is to free slaves, and to make them, to set them free as a result of that. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests people with one another. And this is before min qabli an yatamas, before they would even touch each other. And this is فتحرير رقبة من قبل أن يتماسا ذلكم توعظون به. This is what you have been commanded to do. And al-wa'z is the admonition that should affect the hearts of the person. So ذلكم, this hukm, this ruling, توعظون به, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding you to do this hukm with having the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in applying that hukm. And that's the significance of توعظون به. It did not say this is what you have been commanded to do. No, this is what you have been admonished to do. That means it's a ruling that has with it, you need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means you need to do it and be warned against the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you don't apply that ruling. ذَلِكُمْ تُوعَظُونَ بِهِ. And al-wa'z is when you remind someone of the end result of things, of the hereafter, the Jannah, the hellfire. So in the rulings of the Deen of Islam is a reminder for the person to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be obedient to Allah. So ذَلِكُمْ تُوعَظُونَ بِهِ. So whoever did such an evil act and forbid his wife on himself, then he has to free a slave to protect himself from the consequences of not applying this. وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرٌ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of what you do and well acquainted of what a person do, whether he did it or not, or deceiving others or not. فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ. If a person doesn't find a slave to free, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ. And this is whether it's in the past when there was slavery or present when it's not there, it's not valid for a person to free a slave. So what should a person do? Then he goes to the second ruling here, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ. And it's according to this order, not to choose from these expiations what a person likes. No, if there's no slave, which is the case that we are living in now, then the second thing is what becomes obligatory upon the person, فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يَتَمَسَّ. فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يَتَمَسَّ. That means it's to fast 2 consecutive months. فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ, 2 months. مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ, that means they're consecutive, back to back, without breaking the fast even for a day in between. If a person breaks his fast in between for 1 day, that means it's 60 days, either 60 days, counting 60 days, or 2 lunar months by witnessing the moon or so. That means there might be less than 60 days, and it has to be consecutive without breaking the fast whatsoever. If he breaks the fast, then in the last day, he has to repeat the 2 months again. شهرين متتابعين من قبل أن يتمس, before he touches his wife. This is all before he touches his wife. فَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ. What if a person is not able to, because fasting requires a person to have, a level of health that he's going to be able to do that. And it's not just 1 day or 2 days, it's 60 consecutive days. And مَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ, that means he's not able to, whether it's because of sickness or old age. not because of, it becomes inconvenient for him, or he is working or so. So if he's not able to, then فَإِطْعَامُ سِتِّينَ مِسْكِينًا. If he's not able to fast 2 consecutive months, then to feed 60 poor person, 60 miskin. Whether it's to feed them, that means to fix food for 60 poor people and they eat till they're full, or to give each miskin, 60 miskin, what's a mudd is, which is, something like a handful, or say 1 kilogram of grains that can be saved for 60 poor person, like a kilogram of rice, for example, or whatever that people would eat that can be saved. So these rulings in this particular order, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ لِتُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. This is for you to believe in Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That means when you apply these rulings, that means you are being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is part of al-Iman. It's part of al-Iman, and it increases your Iman when you submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these rulings. And it happens when a person slips or commits a sin, then he has to be responsible for his actions, and if there's the sin requires an expiation for it, then he has to expiate for the sin. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiver. ذَلِكَ لِتُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. This is to believe in Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. وَتِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ. These are the limits of Allah. These are limits that it's not permissible for a person to transgress these limits. And as to be reminded of this and to be warned of the punishment of Allah. This is the limits of Allah. وَلِلْكَافِرِينَ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And for the disbelievers, there's a painful punishment for the disbelievers. Imam Sa'di rahimahullah, he says in these ayat there are certain rulings, a few rulings here, which is one of which is and this should be also mentioned at the end of the surah, that this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most subtle subhanahu wa ta'ala in His rulings. The mercy of Allah shows how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take care of His slaves. And this is how this woman, when she complained, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieved this calamity from her and this concern by these rulings, and the rulings for all the women that would face the same evil actions. Also, that as this dhahar is only with regards to a person forbidding his wife on him, right? So it does not apply into any other thing but his one's wife. It is not permissible for, a dhahar, if a person says words of dhahar forbidding a woman on him before he married her, it is not valid, does not work. Like, for example, someone, is introduced to someone to marry, and he says, she's forbidden for me. It does not make her forbidden for him. He does not have to apply this ruling because she's not his wife. Very clearly also from the verses that al-dhahar is forbidden, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it munkaram min al-qawli wa zura. So it's not like talaq and divorce is permissible to do. No, if a person would say the word of that his wife is forbidden on him, and then he wants to divorce her anyway, is it permissible? No, it's not permissible. It's haram. And the wisdom behind that is that they're not their mothers. So a person is lying and it's falsehood, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade that. And that's why, as Imam Sa'di rahimahullah, he says, and we fall into this many times, it's something that is disliked for a person to call his mother, to call his wife like his mother. And we tend to follow this in all the time. Like your kids are present at home, because your kids, they would call their mother my mother, so you would call your wife, hey mother, right? This is something that is disliked, right? Or even saying my sister, even though sister can be sister in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's still, a person should train himself not to call his wife, oh my sister, or oh my mother, to protect and to perfect one's speech. Also, al-kafara, or the expiation, becomes mandatory if he wants to go back to her, and not by the dhahar itself. Dhahar is haram, to say that is haram, but it doesn't obligate the kafara, the expiation, immediately. It's only the kafara is to be done if he wants to return to his wife. And as we saw in the category of the freeing slave and so on. And this all has to be done before he touches his wife. Also that, the issue of the wisdom behind the kafara before the touching or so is that, as ulama they say, so that he would give it and immediately does it, especially that he wants to go back to his wife and so on. And to feed 60 poor person, that means 60 sittina miskinan. So can someone bring food for 60 people and then he give it to one or two or three or five and they're not 60? It is not permissible, as he says, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says فَيُطْعَمُ سِتِّينَ مِسْكِينًا. You have to feed 60 people. So this is what some of these rulings. Briefly, when we go to the words of the ayat, وَالَّذِينَ يُظَاهِرُونَ, and those who يظاهرون, talked about يظاهرون from ظهر before, من نسائهم, from their wives, their women, from nun sin waw, ثم then يعودون, they go back, from عين واو دال, عاد يعود, لما, on what, قالوا, what they said, فتحرير, then تحرير freeing, from حاء راء, right? And the same thing with al-har, which is hot. It's come from the same roots of it. So فتحرير is to free, ولا تنفروا في الحر, right? And it comes from the wind of the heat or so. So tahrir is to free and freeing. فتحرير رقبة, a slave. And raqaba is from ra, qaf, ba, and raqaba is the neck, and that's what is used for freeing a slave. As if this is how to free their neck, meaning freeing them. And this is something that the Arab would use, and whether it's because not necessarily that they would have chains around their necks, which is some form of humiliation, but this is how they would use the same thing for some animals. So for تحرير رقبة من قبل, from before, أن يتماسى, before يتماسى, before they touch each other, from mean seen, from المس. ذلكم, there is توعظون, from الوعظ, admonished, واو عين ضاد, به, to it. والله, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bima, of what, تعملون, that you're doing, from عين ميم لام, خبير, all aware, from خاء باء راء. فمن لم, then the next ayah, then the one that doesn't find, يجد, meaning freeing a slave, فصيامه, from صيام, from fasting, شهرين, 2 months, متتابعين, from تاء باء عين, متتابعين, one after the other, one following the other, without a break in between. من قبل, from before, أن يتمسى is repeated again, before they're touched, or they return back to each other. فمن لم يجد, or فمن لم يستطع, whoever is not able to, يستطع, from طاء عين واو, from الطوع, from able to. فإطعام, then he is to feed 60 ستين مسكينا, needy one, poor one. ذلك, that is to believe, that you may believe, from الإيمان بالله ورسوله and his messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم. وتلك, and these are حدود, from حاء دال, the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وتلك حدود الله. وللكافرين عذاب أليم. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit of that. طيب, we'll stop here inshallah, and we'll continue next time, and if have any questions, then also for next time inshallah. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.